All right, so we are almost finished learning about intervals. You now know how to write almost all intervals and how to identify them as well. So that's really awesome and a lot to learn in a few short weeks, so good job. Today we're going to learn a little bit about manipulating intervals in different ways. I'm going to start by teaching you in this video interval inversions. An inversion is basically like if you have two or more notes that are played together. Some of them are lower and some of them are higher. So when you invert something, you switch around the order of them. So lower notes become higher notes and higher notes become lower notes. In an interval, there are only two notes, so there's only one way to invert an interval. That's to make the bottom note become the top note, and then the top note becomes the bottom note. I'll show you what I mean here. So here I've written a perfect fifth from F to C. F is the bottom note and C is the top note. If I want to invert this interval, then I'm going to make C the bottom note and F the top note. So I'm still working with F and C, but I'm just going to switch places with them. So I can do this by keeping the C where it is and moving the F up an octave. Like that. Or I can leave the F where it is and move the C down an octave. Like that. And actually both of those are fine. When we're talking about inversions, we don't really care which one you use because they're both C on the bottom and F on top. So the exact octave that they're placed in doesn't matter at this point. In more specific circumstances it might matter, but for now it doesn't really matter which one you do. The point is that we still have an F and a C, but now they've switched places, and instead of F up to C, we have C up to F. And this actually creates a different interval for us. Even though they're the same pitches, the order of them actually makes a big difference. C up to F is a perfect fourth. So we could say that this perfect fifth inverts to a perfect fourth. And that describes what just happened with those notes. An interval will never invert to itself. An interval always inverts to another different interval, which is something that's kind of interesting about how music works. So it's just based on how the scale is built, how the octave is divided. So because of this, it's interesting. You can use it in different ways because you have the same two notes, but depending on how they're situated, you get different intervals, both on paper and in how they sound. Like, as you know from the ear training videos, you can tell that there's a difference between the way a perfect fifth and a perfect fourth sound. So even though you can use the same notes to do them, the order really differentiates some important qualities of those intervals. So this is kind of the longhand way to do it. If you have a perfect fifth, you want to see what it inverts to, you can just literally flip the notes and then you can figure out what that interval is. But there's also kind of a quick, easy way to do it, and that's by just following a little chart that I've made here. So there are two parts to every interval. There's the quality and there's the number. So each of those will change or be manipulated in some way when you invert the interval. So you need to think about both parts when you're inverting. So here, over here is what happens to your qualities. Perfect intervals always stay perfect. So a perfect interval inverts to some other kind of perfect interval. And that's one kind of another interesting quality about perfect intervals that other types of intervals don't have. Major intervals always invert to minor intervals and vice versa, minor to major. Diminished intervals become augmented and augmented intervals become diminished. So if I have a major third, I know it's going to invert to some kind of minor interval. If I have a diminished fifth, I know it inverts to an augmented something. Then to get the number part, we have what I call the rule of 9, which just means that the number of your original interval plus the number of your inverted interval will always equal 9. So on the flip side of on the other page that I had here, we had a perfect fifth that inverted to a perfect fourth, because a fifth plus a fourth will equal 9. If I had, like I said, what if I had a major third? Well, if I have a third will always invert to a sixth, because 3 plus 6 is 9. And in that case, I know that major third will invert to a minor sixth, because major inverts to minor, and third inverts to 6. If I have, for example, a unison, that will actually invert to an eighth, an octave, because unison is the same as a 1, an octave is the same as an 8, and 1 plus 8 is 9. If I had, for example, a seventh will invert to a second, because 7 plus 2 is 9. Okay, so that's how this works. So let's look at a specific example. Let's say I have an augmented sixth. Augmented will invert to diminished, and a sixth will invert to a third. So an augmented sixth will invert to a diminished third. Now we can check this and make sure that it's 100% correct by going back to our staff paper. And let's go ahead and write an augmented sixth, and then we'll invert that interval and see if we get a diminished third out of it. If I'm going to write an augmented sixth above E, I know that it's going to be some kind of C because it's a sixth. And I want to start with a major sixth because that's where I always want to start, with a major or perfect interval. I know that E up to C sharp is a major sixth because C sharp is in the key of E major. In order to make this augmented, I need to make this a half step bigger than major. And I'm going to keep the E the same, so I'm going to move the C sharp up. I want my top note to go up so that I have more space in my interval. So C sharp is going to go up to C double sharp. Now, does this invert to a diminished third? That's an excellent question. That's the question we're trying to answer here. So what I'm going to do is invert this interval and see what happens. I'm going to keep that C double sharp where it is and move the E up an octave so that they switch places. Okay, how can I tell what interval this is? Well, it's definitely a third, so we're so far so good. But I don't have a key of C double sharp major, and thank goodness, right? Because it would have 14 sharps in it, and I guarantee you don't want to write that key signature. So I'm going to use the cover-up method here, and I'm going to cover up that accidental because it is stressing me out. So I'm going to just figure out what happens without the accidental, and then I will come back and add it in at the end when I have more things I've manipulated. So first I'm going to try to find what a major third is, and actually I'm in luck because C to E is already a major third. I don't need to do anything to that, so I'm going to go ahead and just write that down so I don't forget. There's a major third. Okay, so now I'm going to take my hand away and bring that accidental back. A double sharp. So what does this do to our interval to have a double sharp on the bottom note? Well, I'm going to go back and I'm going to use my fingers to kind of show the distance. So I've got C to E like that. And if my C is a C double sharp, it actually is raised twice. So C to C sharp to C double sharp, yeah. So C to E, major third, C sharp to E, minor third, C double sharp to E, diminished third, because we know as we get smaller by half step, major third becomes minor third, which becomes then a diminished third. So this is indeed a diminished third, and this means that this augmented sixth inverts to a diminished third. So that's how you can double check your work. It's actually really nice to be able to do that. It's nice to know more than one way to go about finding an answer to something, because then you can use one way to find the answer and the other way to check the answer. So if I had not come up with a diminished third here, then I might have gone back to my chart and made sure I did that correctly. And if I was pretty sure about that, then I would go ahead and try this step again and make sure I did this correctly, just so that I know where that error is. It's much better to take a little bit longer and make sure that you're accurate than to rush through something and make a mistake just out of carelessness. If you make mistakes, I'm totally cool with it, as long as they're mistakes because of a genuine misunderstanding and not because of, not taking enough time to think it through. So it does take a little longer to do it this way. The chart is super nice because it's really nice and quick, and you can rely on it, but just to make sure that you do it correctly, it's often nice to check your work by doing it this way as well. All right, so that's interval inversions, and it's a good thing to make sure that you fully understand this before moving on to the next video, because we are going to absolutely take this topic and apply it to something else and use inversions to help us with some more difficult tasks.